and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake Lamore, and this is our monthly episode with the Kankakee County Museum, where we dive into something fascinating in our county's history, and joined by Jack Klasey once again. Unfortunately, Jory could not join us today, but she's with us in spirit as always.
Right.
So, Jack, great to have you here.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Jake, and to talk about my favorite topic, which is local history.
Yes. And before we get into today's topic, we got to give just a brief rundown of the events that are coming up at the Kankakee County Museum. Quite a few with December upon us. There's... the holidays at the museum are just always such a great time. And that's probably because of the annual Gallery of Trees.
Yes.
It's the 46th year this year, and that's going to open up on Thursday, December 5th at 9 a.m., and that's at the main campus, of course. There's usually, 30, 50 trees.
Yeah, I think usually the high 30s, the number of trees, which are all sponsored by not-for-profit organizations in town.
And you would swear some of the way these trees are decorated that they were decorated by professionals.
I would think so, yes. There are some that are really amazing.
Yeah, because some of them are just so mind-blowing. So that's something fun to do with the family. That's ongoing through the end of the year. And then, it starts December 5th, but like I said, you can attend it anytime the museum is open in December.
And we usually have longer hours. We're open.
Exactly.
And they're posted. I don't remember precisely what they are. But.
Yeah, if you follow the museum on Facebook, you can get the hours there. And then there's another event, Saturday, December 7th at 9 a.m. It's a Ho-Ho Home Alone for the holidays. So I think if you put two and two together, you probably figure out that it's a Santa stopping by. You can wear your favorite holiday sweater, and they've got a cup of hot cocoa, and you can even get your gifts wrapped by the elves.
Yes.
So, may as well, you do the shopping, give the wrapping to the elves, and you're all done.
And have a good hot chocolate and be warmed up and ready to go do some more shopping outside.
Yeah. So that is Saturday, December 7th, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. The next event is Saturday, December 14th. There's Snow Place Like Home for the holidays. That'll be 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. once again. It's similar, but there's going to be some other activities there. Santa will be there with Frosty as well. And hopefully there'll be some snow on the ground by that time, because they're going to have a snowman building contest that day. So fingers crossed we get some snow that day. The next event would be the Jolly Gingerbread House Jamboree. Now that is always fun. Building your own gingerbread house. That's a great family tradition to do. That'll be Saturday, December 21st from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then on Saturday, December 28th, you have Hogwarts for the holidays. So a Harry Potter themed event. I know growing up in the Harry Potter era, I always think of Harry Potter around the holidays as well, because literally almost every single Harry Potter movie, there's a Christmas scene in there. And then last but not least, we're going to kick off the year, the end of the year with a big bang. Tuesday, December 31st. It's our New Year's Eve party at the Majestic.
Yes.
And this is the second year that we've done this. The first year went very well. So we're doing it again. And there's the Jazz Time Big Band that's going to be playing the whole time. They were so popular last year that people were like, we want more. So,
always good.
Yeah. So tickets are already on sale for that. Again, that's at the Majestic Theater on New Year's Eve. And for these events and more, you can go to KankakeeCountyMuseum.com to get more details. So, and there's always other events that I probably haven't even listed just now.
It's a busy place this time of year especially, but it's always busy year-round because Veronica, our executive director, and her staff put on an awful lot of activities. They believe that, what brings people into the museum are activities and events.
Yep.
And it's proven be. So I think our membership rolls are growing a bit. I hope they are.
Yes. Yeah, having these and these activities are free. That's the nice thing, So you may as well take advantage of that while you can, and see the museum because there's always something new that's happening at the museum. I know a major project in this next year is they're going to be working on the sports exhibit.
That's right.
Tackling that and completely redoing it. So
yeah, because that exhibit has been around a while. It was a century of sports. So it was, sometime after 2000. I think it was probably, I don't remember exactly. I was involved at the time, but I've forgotten the dates.
Something like that. But it's been a while. It needs to be refreshed. There's some things that have happened
definitely.
since then that need to be in that exhibit. So.
And sometimes the emphasis changes a little bit to, how we're dealing with various things. And
exactly.
I think it should be very interesting to see what develops.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it comes out too. So lots happening at the Kankakee County Museum. So today our topic is the Daily Journal, the history of the Daily Journal. And this comes as the small family who's owned the Daily Journal pretty much, we'll get into this, pretty much for its entire existence, pretty close to it. Jack is going to get into the thick of that here in just a minute. But for at least 121 years, the small family has owned the Daily Journal. They recently just sold it to Shaw Media here in the last month. And so when that happened, I mean, it's such a historic sale.
That's right.
I mean, you think 121 years is such a long time, especially for a small market like us.
Yes, that's right.
So I thought, you know what? It's time we do the history of the Daily Journal. We've did an episode about the small family. I think that might have just been with Jory a few years back. So if people want to go back and listen to that episode after they listen to this one, I encourage to do that, just because, I mean, I feel like with the Daily Journal, it's just a sliver of all the things the small family has done or been involved in, and you can kind of learn an overview of that in the small family episode. So yeah, let's get to it, Jack. The Daily Journal. Where do we start with the Daily Journal?
Well, actually, we need to start a few years earlier than that. The small family ownership of the newspaper dates to 1903, and the slogan that's been on page one for a while is "Family owned since 1903." But the history of newspapers in Kankakee, and I think everything is interconnected in its way, actually goes back 171 years.
Oh, wow.
The Kankakee Gazette, which was the city's first newspaper, it was a weekly. The newspaper is as old as the town. The first Gazette was issued in 1853, which is the year that Kankakee County and the city of Kankakee were founded. So newspapers in this community go all the way back to the very beginning.
That's pretty incredible that it existed from the start. Do you think it was printed? You probably can't answer this, but do you think it was actually printed here in 1853, or do you think it was printed elsewhere?
I can tell you exactly.
Okay.
The first issue, and I don't have the date, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Yes, I do have it. August 29th, 1853, was printed in Chicago by Augustine Chester, who was the founding publisher / editor, because he didn't have a press in Kankakee yet.
Right.
In fact, there was very little of Kankakee ready. There were a few buildings being built.
We're talking just, 2 months after it became the county seat?
Yeah, because it was in June, July, August. You're right. Correct. Yeah. And so the second edition was actually printed in Kankakee, because by that time Chester had managed to get his press and other associated equipment delivered via the Illinois Central, which, of course, at that point only went as far as the top bank of the Kankakee River. They weren't quite ready to cross yet.
That bridge wasn't completed until a little later.
That's right.
Yeah.
But his building was not available yet. So actually, the second edition of the Gazette was printed under an oak tree at the corner of Schuyler and Court Street.
I love that.
Open air publishing.
It's I can't help but think of my grandfather. People have heard me talk about Franklin Weber from Weber Printing in Manteno. He was on one of the very early episodes of Kankakee Podcast, but I always think of a story he used to tell me when he was a young boy and started doing his own printing. There were times where he had his press outside under a tree and would do his work there, his printing, which is just, it boggles my mind, but it was a thing. It happened.
That's right. He didn't have one of the obstacles, though, of that Chester involved in all of the early publishers back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They were weeklies for a couple of reasons. One, because that was about how much news you could turn up.
Yeah, in such a small town at the time.
But secondly, the mechanical methods of producing newspapers at that time, every story was built in metal type, one letter at a time, and was assembled. So you had a great deal of time necessary to develop 8 or 12 pages of stories that were put together one letter at a time and locked up in a form and then used for printing. That changed in the 80s or so, I think, when the liner type or mechanical typesetting equipment came in.
Yes,
then
this predates that.
That's right.
Yeah, so think of, I guess to try to explain it for someone that doesn't have the knowledge of it, a linotype pretty much it just kind of automates the process of making all the different letters and all the different pieces of type.
It cast a metal piece that was the width of one column in the newspaper, one line. And you had, in fact, anybody who has a chance to visit the Kankakee County Museum, see the printing exhibit. There is a linotype, which used to belong to the Journal, and examples of all kinds of things in the technology of newspapers that I think is quite fascinating.
Yes.
I'm a little prejudiced, but...
No, me too, because, growing up in a printing family, that stuff just fascinates me. So just imagine before the linotype was invented, you had to put together every single letter.
That's right. And the spaces between the words and so forth.
Exactly.
They had to all be tight enough to be tightened up so that you had a whole form that you could use to print the page.
Right. And the linotype where you could fit, a sentence or more, depending on how it was set up. That really made things much more easier, and you could do things faster.
Much faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I think that the early newspapers were, for one thing, they were a different format than we're used to today. They were what was called a broadsheet, and it was probably, if thinking in terms of the Journal, if you opened out so you had a full page available or 2 pages, it would have been maybe half again larger on one side and on the top. So in other words, you had a much larger sheet of paper, and that was the history. I mean, that's happened to be how paper was manufactured at that time. And so for various reasons, including just practicality, most of the newspapers at that time were a weekly and did not become, semi-weeklies, which were generally speaking like a Monday and a Thursday until, probably the 1860s or so. Just a quick rundown on a few of the backgrounds before we get to the Journal itself of some of the papers that were here, because there were times we had as many as 3 to 4 newspapers being published in the city of Kankakee. 1856, the semi-weekly Kankakee County Democrat was the second paper in Kankakee. It was founded by Cyrus Ingram and Henry Austin. A bit later, in the late 50s, early 60s, the Durham brothers of Kankakee had acquired the newspaper, and Jerome and Gabriel. But in 1862, they suspended publication of their newspaper because they went off to war with the Union Army. Jerome survived. Gabriel, unfortunately, was killed. He was the first Union casualty at Gettysburg. He was a member of the 12th Illinois cavalry.
Wow.
And when I visited Gettysburg many years ago, and I more or less found the spot where the 12th Illinois was fighting. So I sort of visited Gabriel's site while I was there.
Did they have that marked out there?
There are ways of finding out who was where at different times, or which, not people, but the regiments or the units.
Wow.
1860s through the early 1880s, there were just a whole bunch of newspapers that sort of came and went. There was the Gazette, of course, which stayed around for quite a while, the Union, the Herald, the Democrat, the Times, and the predecessor of the Journal. And I'm not sure much, we don't know much about that in the earlier days, but a big event, 1886, was the first daily newspaper in Kankakee. Charles Livingston, who published the Kankakee Weekly Times, announced that his newspaper had become a daily, and he had an editorial that stated, "We believe that there is sufficient life in Kankakee for such an enterprise. This daily will give you the latest news served up warm every evening at your residence." And interestingly, it took a while for the other newspapers, other weekly newspapers, for a couple of them to become dailies. We got up to finally 1903. The city had 3 dailies: Times, Gazette, and the Evening Democrat. And then we have finally the evolution of the Journal beginning. What happened was on March 16th, 1903, a group of 50 investors led by Len Small, who was a very prominent local farmer, businessman, and so forth, a future governor of Illinois, of course, and a banker, bought the Daily Times. And they renamed it the Kankakee Daily Republican because at that time, newspapers were very strongly partisan. The idea of a nonpartisan method of reporting news and so forth did not come around until quite a bit later, when the national wire services, news services came about, because they had to serve newspapers that of all stripes politically, so they adopted a non-political approach.
Yeah.
To
some say
news.
That hasn't changed, but
I know there are many who would say that. Yes. Anyway, though, the Kankakee Daily Republican kind of stumbled along for about 10 years, even though I think because the competition was there, it was the weakest of the 3 dailies in town.
Oh, really?
And just didn't seem to do well. They went through, I think, 6 different managing editors over the period of 10 years. So in 1913, though, the owners decided something had to be done to just get this newspaper on track if they were going to survive.
And probably get their investment back.
Exactly,
too.
yes. And so Len Small at this time was the president of the First National Bank of Kankakee, and because it was probably the reason why they chose this particular young man. There was a young 26-year-old teller baby banker, I guess he would be, in their organization, named Leslie Small, who happened to be Len's son. He was assigned to, quote, find the causes and the remedy of the newspaper's financial problems and set them right. It was supposed to be about a 3 or 4 day activity that he would come in and identify where the problems are,
just
and
kind of like audit the place,
right?
Almost,
and say, okay, here's what we need to do to make it a worthwhile newspaper. Well, it turned into several weeks, and then all of a sudden, eventually, it became a 43-year assignment. Leslie Small found that being a newspaper publisher and editor was more interesting than being a junior teller in the bank, apparently.
Maybe found that a little more fulfilling.
I think so. And over that period of, from the 43 years that Leslie was the publisher and managing and general manager, he put the newspaper on a sound financial footing, as one would expect for a former banker, and built the Republican circulation from 1,100 copies a day to 24,000 copies a day in the 70s, I think it was at that time. So there was still competition, of course. There was still the Gazette and the Evening Democrat were out there, and there was a lot of fighting over space, circulation, which meant you could sell more ads and so forth. But in 1920, the number of dailies in town came down to 2 because the Gazette and the Evening Democrat merged to form the Kankakee Daily News. The city would be a 2-newspaper town for the next 11 years. So you had the Republican and the Kankakee Daily News going head-to-head. But that changed again in June 1st of 1931. The Republican and the Daily News combined to form the Kankakee Republican News, hyphenated. The hyphenated title was intended to be used for only a short period. They were to get people used to it, I guess. But it actually continued for 14 years before it was renamed. And that happened on September 18th, 1945, when a banner headline on the front page said, "Newspaper changes name." I guess people wouldn't have noticed that if they didn't have the banner headline. It became the Kankakee Daily Journal and remained the Kankakee Daily Journal until August 1973, when the word Kankakee was dropped from the name. People still refer to it as the Kankakee Journal, obviously,
yes.
but
yeah.
And so the next major change, and we get many other things to talk about, but
just to give a timeline.
Continue our timeline here was October 26th, 2024, just a few weeks ago. Headline in the Journal said, and this was not a banner headline, it was a much smaller headline, but very significant, Daily Journal sold to Shaw Media Group, which is headquartered in Crystal Lake, Illinois. And it's a really good-sized operation. I don't know if you have to check into it.
I looked into it. They own quite a few papers and some radio stations as well.
More than 40 newspapers.
Yeah.
And I think they have some podcasts and a number of other things, and, of course, radio stations. And these are concentrated pretty much in Illinois, but they do have some, I believe, in Iowa.
Yeah, they've got some other states. I forgot what all the others were. But, yeah, it was too many to list off, but quite a few.
That's right. So the November 2 weekend edition of the Daily Journal meant the end of the small family publishing era in Kankakee. Interesting to note that was actually 4 generations of ownership. We go back, the first generation, of course, was Len Small, who owned the paper in its early days. By 1913, of course, his son Leslie became the owner, publisher, / et cetera, or the Daily Journal Company, or in that case, the Daily Republican Company.
Yes.
The third generation is when I got involved with the company, not as an owner, but as a worker, as a reporter. And it was owned and operated by Len H. Small and his brother Burl, both of whom interviewed me for my job interview coming to work as a reporter for the Journal in 1963. It was an interesting division at that time, too, because the Journal proper activities included the radio station WKAN.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if there were any other radio stations at that time, but the brothers divided the operation. Burl took over the audio operation, the radio section, and Len stayed with the newspapers. Burl's involvement got a lot busier in a few years when Kankakee Cable was started, which was, of course, a subsidiary of the radio station or the Journal Company operation. Anyway, after the fourth generation of Smalls to own and operate the paper was the last. Len Robert, usually known as Rob. Tom lived in Kankakee. Rob, I believe, lived based in Chicago. He also is, his wife is French, and they had a place in Paris. And I think that she actually lived in Paris. And then their sister Jennifer, who for some period of time was a operated the Kankakee Journal's Washington Bureau, which lasted for a time. But so we've gone through 4 generations of this family, and it's very interesting because the waxing and waning of the newspaper,
just media as a whole.
Well, that's right. There's so many changes. The whole idea of printed newspapers has become, an endangered species, as we were talking about a few minutes ago with the Moment's Progress Reporter, for example, going out of business.
Yeah, we were talking about that off mic.
And we've lost a number of other newspapers in town. Oh, speaking of Leslie Small, by the way, I've got a picture here.
Okay.
A gentleman with very serious looking, but a nice smile.
Mm-hmm. I can see Len in his face.
You can definitely see Len in that. Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Oh, yeah.
And a few of the, when the newspaper was the Daily Republican, and this was about the 1920s, I think, that this particular building was built. People who have been around since the 1950s might have recognized this building. It was on the corner of Oak Street and Schuyler. Let's see, be the southwest corner of the street, a 3-story brick building. Trying to think what is there now. Very low rise, single. Across from the parking lot at Rigo's, across station Schuyler Avenue, just south of the Paramount Theater.
Oh.
Across Oak Street.
There's a furniture store there or something now, and there's like a currency exchange.
Yeah, and there's just a string of, I think it's a clinic of some sort on that same property.
Something like that. Yeah. Oh, so that building was built like right next to the radio station.
Exactly. The radio station was just to the south of that. In fact, speaking of that.
And of course, the building we were just talking about doesn't exist, but the radio station building still exists.
And I think that's the one that is now a medical clinic of some sort.
It was a medical clinic, but now it's actually like an art space.
Okay. I'm not up to date.
Yeah. So there's a lot of bands that have practice spaces there.
Okay.
And even I think even a couple people record podcasts out of some of those. They kind of like divided up all the rooms in there, and they rent them out. I don't know if it's Dustin Cooey that owns the building, or one of the prominent
entrepreneurs
prominent Kankakee and real estate investors owns it. But I've been in there a few times, and there's still some remnants of when it was a radio station where you can, if you have ever worked in a radio station, you would be able to pick it out and be like, oh, that is from
that
when it was a radio station, So
something interesting too in this picture is the call letters WKIL.
Yes.
Now WKAN, of course, was and still is an AM station.
Right.
But WKIL was an FM operation, operated for a number of years, and then eventually was sold to the call letters, the business was sold to somebody in Chicago. So it never really thrived. I think this was before FM became really popular. It was too early.
Yes.
But we have some interesting pictures of the interior of the WKAN studios, including some of the performers and their microphones and so forth.
There's so many cool pictures from the old KAN days. Right. But getting back to the paper, it's just amazing that 4 generations were involved with it.
That's right, and actively involved.
And actively involved for such a long time. And we didn't even talk about there's Stephen Small. It's a part of it too. Obviously.
Oh, yes, well, the radio station side of things, he was Burrell's son.
Right, yeah.
Well, coming back to this picture for a moment.
Sure.
This probably, I don't have a precise date, but I think it was built in probably about the 1920s.
It looks very 1920s.
And was the headquarters for the newspaper until 1951 when they built the structure at Merchant Street and Dearborn Avenue. In this picture, you can't tell, but I believe these presses were in the basement.
Oh, no way.
of this building.
Oh, gosh.
Presses were smaller in those days.
They were smaller,
are now,
and a lot of times they would take them apart in pieces
yes.
and then put them together. So that's how they would get something big like that into.
Yeah.
In fact, bringing it up to speed to present day, I'll give a shout out to local realtor Allison Asher. She's a previous sponsor of the podcast.
Okay.
And I saw on her Facebook page that she recently showed the old Daily Journal headquarters, the one you were just referencing there,
Right.
at Dearborn Square. And they still have, I guess, the presses in there.
Huge press.
They're huge. They still have the huge presses in there. And I was sharing the pictures with my grandfather, and he was saying that they're probably still in there because they would have to probably hire someone to come in to take it apart to haul it all out of there.
Oh, yes.
So, but it was interesting. Like I would have thought, because the Journal stopped printing their own paper. It's been some time.
Yes.
And I would have figured they would have gotten rid of it already, but I guess a lot of that is still there.
Yes, I think it's strictly a salvage operation.
Right.
Nobody is buying presses like that to run them as presses anymore.
No, definitely not.
Speaking of which, this is a model of that press, the modern press at the Journal.
Okay.
And we actually happen to have this model over at the museum.
Oh, okay.
The model is relatively small, but the press is huge.
Yes.
I've been down in the floor below the press where the real, what's called the real room, where the rolls of paper were attached and running around, and they're just mind-blowing.
Yeah, really
the two people you see here are Len Small, of course, at the left, Len H. Small, and his wife, Jean Alice. They were an interesting, dynamic couple.
They really ran that paper hard. I've heard
they did.
I can't remember if I'm sure you shared stories about Jean, but I've heard some interesting stories about her in particular.
She was a lovely lady.
Yeah.
She was also a very smart businesswoman, and she ran a damn good newspaper. Excuse my language.
No, you're fine.
I wasn't at the paper. I had gone from there by that time, but my wife was working for her. My wife was the Journal's librarian for 24 years.
That's right.
And so she handled what is called by newspaper people the morgue.
Yes.
Which is where dead stories go.
Mm-hmm. But that was an important job for when you needed to reference something from the past.
That's right. All the clippings were filed and indexed and so forth. So if you needed to find out, when did such and such church burn down,
sure,
or something like that, you could find it. But Jean Alice became the publisher of the newspaper on March 11th, 1980. Len was killed in an auto accident near the state park, in fact, on 113 at Warner Bridge Road. He was en route to Midway Airport to fly to Washington, D.C. for a meeting of the American Newspaper Publishers Association, where he was a member of the board, and in fact had been scheduled for the following year to become the president of that organization. Len was a working newsman. He was a lawyer by trade, or by degree, but he was a working newsman. You would see him in the newsroom all the time at the Journal. This is from probably the late 70s, possibly, and I don't remember.
Yeah,
I sort of vaguely remember who the man is he's talking to, but I can't quite put a name to him. I'm sure that some people will recognize him.
Mm-hmm.
But he was, and this, of course, obviously from the word news, this is in the newsroom at
right.
the Dearborn Avenue store, or Dearborn Avenue building.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just an interesting guy. And I thought he was strongly committed, and Jean Alice was strongly committed to doing a job of really covering and helping people to understand what this community is about.
Yes. Yeah.
And they also got into a lot of other business, or not a lot of other businesses, but the same business, but in a much larger sense. The the small newspaper group, which became the overall company running the operation, from the 1970s to the 1990s, somewhere at various times, they acquired a fairly large number of newspapers. Some of them came and gone, but at one point, I think there were 9 newspapers that they owned.
Quite a few.
Plus a couple of radio stations, but basically.
Right. And the cable television.
Yeah, exactly.
That was short-lived. But
yeah, the Illinois newspapers were the Journal, of course, Streeter newspaper, Ottawa, Moline, and Rock Island. They owned a newspaper in Rochester, Minnesota, one in LaPorte, Indiana, and 2 in California, Roseville and Pacific Palisades.
And weren't some of the, and some of those might have come about because weren't some of members of the small family in those states or in those areas, like lived there?
Not that I know. I think these were all primarily business operations. And of course, there's some movement in between going from one newspaper to the other. I know
Sure.
John Bowman, who was at one point a Journal sports editor, but later became the managing editor of the Journal, ended up going to one of the California newspapers as their publisher and general manager. And there were a lot of that kind of interchange. They also, at one point, and I've forgotten precisely which one, but the weekly magazine supplements that used to be in the papers on Sundays, you had Parade, I think, and This Week. And
there's been various ones. The last one I can remember was USA Today, right?
No, that was not a magazine. That was a newspaper.
That wasn't a magazine. Or maybe it wasn't USA Today, but it was something USA Today.
Yeah, magazine. It could have been.
I thought it was a magazine, but
yeah. I think it was This Week magazine that the Journal owned at one point for not an awful long time. They also, I believe, for a brief period, owned United Press International, the wire service, which now still exists, but it's owned by some conglomerate I think in India or some such thing.
Wow.
Speaking of USA Today, though, for many years, they printed the Midwest edition of USA Today at the Journal, and it was important in many ways. Prestige from a standpoint of winning awards for quality printing work and that sort of thing, but also financially, it was a significant moneymaker, the fees that they charged for printing for the Journal.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know, I think Kevin Norden, I think was his name. He was one of the people that would oversee printing.
I think so, yeah. I know the name is familiar.
Yes, and I remember having conversations with him about that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, a lot of people through the years have played important roles in the Journal and have gone on to other things.
So many. I know we literally just interviewed a few weeks ago someone who was an editor and gone through all different roles at the Journal. Her name was Rachel Reynolds.
Oh, yes.
Yes. We just had her
Rachel
on
Reynolds Susie.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. We literally just had her on the podcast, and I didn't know she worked for the Journal until she
Oh, yeah. She was there for quite a few years.
Yeah. She said 20-some.
Good writer.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent.
No. And now she does a lot of, I think, cosmetics.
Gracie Pie Apothecary.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And she does all of the
soap,
farmers markets and things like that.
Yeah.
I, in fact, come to think of it, my wife and I were at her wedding.
Oh, really?
And it was in Joliet.
Yeah, she's originally from that area.
Steve Susie was a sports writer at the Journal.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
I don't know if there's still a couple or not.
I'm not sure either, but regardless, it seems like this day and age, all roads lead to the Daily Journal.
I think so. Yeah,
if you think about it. I mean, I know so many people, when I worked at Milner Media, there's former employees of the Journal there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just all over the place. So many people have worked for the Daily Journal. I don't know if you've got numbers anywhere of how many people at one point worked at the Journal, but it's got to be a big number.
Well, I can give you an illustration. Okay. Currently, I believe the editorial staff at the Journal is about 7 or 8 people. It kind of shifts a little bit, including sports writers and when I was at the Journal in 63 through 68, our newsroom had more than 50 people in it.
That's insane.
Yes. And a lot of change,
Oh, yeah.
But the world has changed. The advertising revenue is not there anymore. It's migrated to digital platforms.
Right. And I mean, the Journal has gone with that. I mean, how many people actually read the physical daily Journal? Mm-hmm. So many people are reading the articles posted online.
That's right.
On their website, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. I would say, I read generally the print version, but I also frequently, if I'm in a hurry, will bring up or if I happen to be sitting by my computer or something else, will bring up the digital version. Journal publishes and has for now the last several years 2 print editions a week, which of course is the Wednesday and the weekend edition, and then 5 days of strictly digital. And the president of Shaw Media, in a story in the Journal not too long ago, said that they would continue that. Some of their papers go 5 days a week print, but as he said, and I think he's probably right, he said, the direction is not to increasing the number of print pages. They could do it, but he said, why would we bother? Because at some time fairly shortly thereafter, we'd have to go back to, cut down on the number of print.
Yes. It would make more sense to just try to increase your coverage.
That's right. And he has maintained, and I'm hoping this is really true, that they plan to make a stronger and better coverage of local events. As he said, if you are interested in reading about a sort of cantankerous political kind of stuff, national news, there's plenty of outlets to get that. You won't find them in the paper here.
Yeah, you can get national news and all that elsewhere, but the local news is so important.
That's right.
And honestly, I've always, the past few years, or even better, it's very impressive just what a small editorial staff can actually cover at the Journal. Lee Provost is heading it now as the editor.
That's right.
I mean, it's amazing what Lee and the rest of, Jeff Bonte and Chris Breach, Tiffany Blanchette.
Right.
It's amazing how much they can
Taylor Letton McMaster. She has, of course, left the Journal now, and she's working, I believe, for Riverside.
She is. Yeah, I was sad to see her go.
I was too, because she was she had an incredible output. The amount of material she would create every day.
Yeah. I know. And I think...
and good material. It was not just tons of words. It was well written.
Yes. I think we take that for granted. And also just, if you know how many bodies are behind all of the stories that are getting put out, it's actually pretty impressive. Mm-hmm. Honestly, of course, things can always be better. And
That's
hopefully with Shaw Media, it will be. But for... what the Journal has been able to do with what they have, I think, is still pretty impressive for the size market we're in. Because there's other small cities like us that don't have a daily Journal.
That's right,
or
have no local newspaper at all.
No, or maybe they do, but there's like 1 or 2 people there. And that's it.
Yes, and
what are they going to do?
Primarily, what we used to refer to as a shopper, which is basically something for local advertising and throw a few news stories in around them.
Yep.
Something interesting. Something that will be coming up before the end of next year is a physical change in the newspaper's size.
The tabloid.
Going to go to a tabloid, which most of their newspapers are. And actually, there's a lot of logic for that, because the tabloids are easier to handle, easier to read. They're a more natural kind of thing, I think, to be able to hold open and read.
Yes.
And going back to, all the way back to the broadsheets, they were replaced by the current size of newspaper.
Yeah.
And now the tabloid will be coming about.
Right. Yeah.
And also from a standpoint of production, apparently, and I think that's one of the reasons in the story I mentioned, the efficiencies of scale.
Oh, absolutely.
If all of their newspapers are being printed as tabloids, they can consolidate those on the same press operation and so forth.
Yeah, just so we're not confusing anyone with like tabloids with tabloids. When we talk about tabloid,
Yes.
we mean the size of the paper.
Not the supermarket things saying, the aliens are taking over the women's clubs or something like that.
Yeah, something ridiculous. It's literally all a tabloid size paper is. It's actually, you take an 8.5 by 11 sheet and you multiply it by 2, you get 11 by 17 and you fold it in half.
Right.
And that's a tabloid.
That's it. And an example that some people might be familiar with, Chicago Sun-Times.
Yeah, that's true. They're a tabloid.
They've been tabbed for as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've talked about a few more things relating to the journal.
I know there's so much that we can get into. And again, someone listening to this might be like, you didn't talk about this, you didn't talk about that,
exactly.
yada, yada. This is just a kind of a summary, a brief. I mean, we could do a whole series on the ins and outs of the journal. That's and right. All the subsidiaries you mentioned and all the family members. And that could go on for 20 episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Easily.
Yeah, one thing, for example, and this is a personal kind of thing in many respects. As I say, I was a reporter at the Journal from 63 through 68. I had come here from Suburban Weekly, and previous to that, my first newspaper job was a small daily newspaper in the southeast side of Chicago called the Daily Calumet. And in between there, I'd thrown in a year writing television news.
In Wisconsin, right?
In Wisconsin, WISN TV. But I came to the Journal, and I believe, if I remember correctly, when they hired me, my salary was the largest they had ever paid for an incoming reporter or something. It was not huge. It was like $185 a week or something like that.
But back at that time, even it's funny you think about it. Even journalists back in the heyday of newspapers still didn't make that great of money.
Oh no, never did. My first newspaper job was minimum wage, $1.25 an hour.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I was telling Tom Small one day that the column that I write for the Journal, I'm a freelancer, of course. I'm not employed by the Journal.
Right.
I charge $50 a column. That happens to be precisely what my first newspaper job paid weekly.
Oh my gosh. Did you do that on purpose or did you just figure that out? You just figured that out one day? That's funny. So have you talked to any of the Smalls recently?
No, not since the announcement. I haven't.
Since the announcement? Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I haven't. And I think that it's probably really mixed emotions on their part, I think.
Oh, yes. And they actually put out some, I guess you could call them editorials. They put out some articles themselves before Shaw took over.
Oh, yeah.
If any listener wants to go back and read those.
Yeah, there was a couple of stories. I know that Rob was writing about his great-grandfather, the governor, and so forth, and then there were a couple of others. Interesting, I don't know, in some ways, and this is going to sound like ego, I guess, but I was, and I have always maintained, the first person in Kankakee to know about the assassination of John Kennedy.
Yes, I remember you telling me this story before.
I was the reporter on duty at November 22nd, 1963. It was lunchtime, and at that time, the paper came out in the early afternoon and went to press probably, 1 o'clock-ish or something. So when the paper was put to bed, all the editorial work was completed. Everybody took off for lunch except for usually the youngest or newest reporter got to stay and watch the store.
And that was you.
Yeah. All of the other reporters and editors ended up at Jensen's Restaurant, which was building where the cable office was later on. In other words, halfway up the street, halfway up the hill on Dearborn.
Okay.
Originally, it was a former photo studio.
Oh, wow.
But then became Jensen's Restaurant, and that was the place that everybody went for. And so I was in this empty newsroom and listening to the clacking of, or the UPS and AP wire teletypes. And, they were constantly running, spitting out stories and so forth. But there was a signal system. If something was important, there was a bell system. And it was, I don't know, 1 bell for one of this, 2 bells for this, 3 bells for that. I think this was a 3 bell. So I go, bing, 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 bing. I thought, that sounds like I ought to check and make sure what that is. So I went over to the teletype, and there was just a single sentence. There were reports of gunshots on the presidential motorcade route in Dallas. Whoa, yeah, that's important, very important. And of course, we soon followed up with more details. My first step was to grab the phone and call
the
Jensen's restaurant.
Yeah.
I don't remember what her last name was, but Rita was the reigning waitress there. She had been there for years, and she knew everybody.
It's so funny you remember those things.
And I said to her, Rita, tell everybody from the Journal to get the hell down the hill and back to the newspaper. We got a problem. So they turned up, and we spent, literally, it was a case of stop the press. Well, not quite stop the presses. Don't start the presses.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody pitched in to get as much local coverage of reaction and so forth as we could. And we were pretty proud of the job we did, because I think we did under the pressure of just maybe less than an hour's worth of time, we were able to put together the story and at least get people started with the information.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I can feel that pressure just by you talking about it. I can just feel it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can't imagine what that must have been. And of course,
even then, the electronic media had the advantage, of course, and the coverage of that was incredible. One of my strongest memories of that was Walter Cronkite breaking into tears.
Yeah.
I think that, something we've explored here through the last hour or so has just been the important role that news, no matter how you get it, plays in our lives. That we must have a unfettered source of information to tell us what is going on in the world so that we can adjust ourselves to that. And even more so, what's going on locally, because that's where we're in danger of losing it. Thank goodness it looks like we're going to have staved off the problem that so many communities have that have lost their local news source.
Yes.
And I have high hopes that Shaw Media will continue and even improve upon what I think that they have a better financial resources than the Smalls had at this point, because life has changed a lot. Oh, yeah. But I think that this should be very good.
I certainly hope so. And I could not agree with you more on that, Jack. And I will remind people too, since we're talking about the importance of local news, it's very similar to how government is. Everyone needs to participate and do their share. Yeah. So if you catch wind of some news and you think, maybe I should share this with a local news source, please do, because they don't always know. I will preach this till I'm blue in the face. Just because they're a local news source doesn't mean they know everything.
That's right.
There are things that happen that they have no knowledge of, and they need to be told. So please keep that in mind. Anytime you think that there's a chance that, hey, this just happened. I don't know. I wonder if the Daily Journal knows about this, or I wonder if Kankakee Podcast knows about this. Whoever it is,
or the local radio station.
Or the local radio station. Hit them up. Say, hey, I don't know if you saw this, but I just thought I'd pass it along. Right. It's better to do that than passive aggressively complain about it on the internet, saying, well, the Journal didn't write about this.
Yes.
Well, maybe it's because they didn't know about it.
Yes, that's right.
So we can't be everywhere at once.
Often the case.
Yeah, exactly. So just to put that out there. But anyway, so there is just a very brief history of the Daily Journal.
Brief and rather discursive and just back and forth.
Yeah, back and forth. And maybe one day we'll do a deeper dive on all the ins and outs of the Daily Journal. And with that being said, too, I know I'll mention it again. If you want to go back and listen to the episode about the small family, I encourage that. And then actually go back and listen to the episode where we dive into your life, Jack, because you do talk about the journal as well in your story. So I think people will be interested in hearing those episodes if they haven't yet. So, well, Jack, this has been great as always.
Always has been. I certainly enjoyed you hosting me and the journal. No, excuse me, the museum people.
Yes, absolutely.
Myself and Jory, who is in absentia today, but she'll be back the next time around.
Yes, Jory is always here with us in spirit. So we encourage you, of course, to check out the Kankakee County Museum. You can learn more at KankakeeCountyMuseum.com, and you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram as well, just to stay up to date on everything that's happening there.
Excellent. Thank you again.
That concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake Lamore. Thank you so much for listening. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Kankakee Podcast. Shout out to Teague Dreenan for supporting the show each month through Patreon. If you want your name announced on a future episode, you can sign up at patreon.com/Kankakee Podcast. Special thanks to our sponsors, Chicago Dough Company, Noble Dairy Queen Stores, Frank's Appliance Center and Sleep Source, Pigosh Engineering, King Music, Little Me's Studio, Taco John's, D. Westfall Jewelers, and Edward Jones Financial Advisor, Adam Elroy. Kankakee Podcast is produced by the fine team at Pathfinder, a full-service marketing agency in downtown Kankakee. Learn more at yourpathfinder.io. Our theme song is by Lupe Carroll.